Good evening, everybody. Let me thank very much the Trickle and Harness Board of Members, my dear friend, Chairperson. Thank you for inviting me here today. Let me also recognize members of the county government, the county assembly, my fellow members of the Law Society. I'm still a member of the Law Society. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here today. When I was asked to come to speak, I was told, come and talk to us about women in leadership. And I think I'm going to approach this topic in three ways. I'll give you three dimensions. First of all, we need to understand what is the purpose of women in leadership? And then I'd like to take you a little bit through the history of women in leadership. And finally, I want to just talk about my own story. I think it's a simpler way of approaching this topic in a way that is simple and that can be well understood. The question is always made to me for many years, why do we need more women in public office? Why can't men speak for the women? What is so special that women need to be in public office? But you do know that public office is where the decisions are made, where the decisions are made about how taxes are spent. Decisions are made where laws and policies that affect your life. Public office is about power and control. It is about the corridors of power that we heard about just now. And it's about who gets to sit on the table that makes the decisions that affect us. It's a largely male space, and that is why we've talked about patriarchy. And for the longest time in Kenya, it was an exclusive male space. But it must be understood that women need to be in public office. Women must be in public office. Women deserve to be in public office for 4 reasons. 1, women pay taxes. And therefore, where those taxes go, we need to have a voice. Every woman who goes and buys a kilo of sugar pays tax. Everything you pay for in the shops, you pay tax. Where is that tax going to, and is it coming back to serve you? The second thing is, we vote, and therefore we want to vote for people who represent us, but we also want to be voted for. There is the issue of representation in elective and appointive offices that we need to be represented simply because of the third reason, the sheer numbers. 50% of the population means that we cannot be outside the door. We cannot not be represented on the table. And you know, when we say we want 50%, they say, those are too many seats, you're asking for too much. But we are half the population. We are only asking for what is rightfully ours. But finally, we must be in public office and we must have a seat on that table because men and women are equal, but we are different. Let me repeat that. Men and women are equal, but we are different. And therefore, our priorities are not the same. When you sit and decide what to tax, what men find to be a priority and what women find to be a priority are different because our needs are different. Women, we focus on our reproductive, biological issues. You know, we have menstruation, so we want to know how much will sanitary towels cost. We have maternity issues. We want to know whether Linda Mama is coming and how much it will cost us to go to hospitals to give birth and what are the complications. We even have menopause. Some of us are reaching now. And that is not a concern of a man. A man would not know what is menopause. And therefore, when we are making policies and laws and determining where money goes on those issues, women must be there. And I'll give you an example shortly about how we, as women of Kenya, lobbied for the zero rating of sanitary towels as an example of why it is important for women to make decisions about things that affect them directly. Of course, this means that as we demand for space on the table, as we demand for our seats, we are also asking for those who are privileged and for those who already have power to give up something. Power sharing, as you all know, we are Kenyans, is very difficult. So as women, we are trying to get the nusumkate. The other side is saying we are not going to give you nusumkate. And therefore, we have to learn how to negotiate so that we are able to get what is rightfully ours, because we have been powerless for so long. Actually, the structures of power historically has been those who have power have been male, they have been healthy. In colonial times, they were white. And therefore, if you are a woman, you're black, you're poor, you're right at the bottom of the barrel. And that's a shift in power that we have tried to make. I find it necessary to walk you through a brief history about where women in this great nation have come from. When I was a young activist myself, about 40 years ago, for those of you who don't calculate my age, but for about 40 years ago, the political landscape was very different. Women were invisible. You could not find them in government offices unless they were below a certain job grade. Our participation was restricted to family, church congregations, community activities, family life. We also had single party KANU. So there you can be in the women's wing, but not in the mainstream of the national executive committees. Before we got independence, we had a team that went to Lancaster. You know in your history, you've all learned about the Lancaster talks. Did you know that there was a woman there? There was a woman among the Kenyans who went to Lancaster to negotiate about our new constitution for Kenya. Her name was Priscilla Abuao, but she was relegated to the sidelines, not allowed to speak. She was told to write a memorandum, which was ignored, and in history books, you do not find her name. But she was there. The first woman to be nominated to the legislature was a woman called Jemima Gashaga. She served only for 2 years, after being asked to step down for a man to take that position. You will not find her name in our history books. Then between 1969 and 1993, a span of 23 years, you will hear a little bit about some women. Grace Onyango, Eva Mwendwa, Edgar Shukia, Grace Ogot, most recently late Phoebe Asio. Just a sprinkling of women in a parliament then that had 108 members of parliament. But it was really Beijing, the Beijing conference in 1995, when the women of Kenya, the voices of Kenyan women started being heard within government. In 1985, first of all, a conference was held in Nairobi. So the government was hosting. There were no women ministers. There were no women to host a women's conference. Can you imagine that? Such that in 1995, when the government delegation went to Beijing, President Moi hastily appointed the first woman cabinet minister. Because surely, how would a delegation going to Beijing be led by a male cabinet minister? And that is how the conversation started. And the Beijing conference discussed many things, including how we stereotype women leaders, the sexism that exists. And at that time, Wangari Maathai, the Nobel laureate, was embroiled in a dispute with the government, exchanging words with the president on environmental rights about Uhuru Park. At the same time, Wambui Otieno was in a legal battle with her husband's clan about where to bury her husband. Both women were vilified. They were verbally attacked. They were abused by politicians on public platforms. They were abused in the media. Many women students, university students like myself then, that is when we started waking up and saying, why are women being treated this way? And that's when we started a more militant approach towards the defense of women's rights and the need for government to step in and prevent the abuse of the rights of women. By the way, much later in life, when I was in the 9th Parliament, I was with Wangari Maathai when she won the Nobel. And the first people who congratulated her on the floor of the House were the very men who had abused her many, many years ago. How life changes, how life changes. So at that time, the Kenya government of Kenya, it was very sluggish, just responding to international pressure, putting one woman here, woman one here. The first woman permanent secretary was appointed in 1987, but it would be another 10 years before Sally Kosgei was appointed as the head of public service, the first and last woman ever to hold that position in Kenya. So we continue like this, limping away in women's leadership. You know, we have 4 women MPs in 1992, 8 women MPs in 1997. But then, in 2002, when Mwai Kibaki won the election, something significant happened. As part of the promises that he made to women then, he appointed the largest number of women we'd ever seen. PSs, ambassadors, judges. Suddenly, women were in government. And at that time, the number of women MPs jumped from 8 to 18. And it was a very big number then. Yeah? I was in that parliament where we walked in and there were men making remarks like, now you women, you've come smelling, you smell with perfumes. There were no toilets for us. We were not allowed to walk in with our handbags into the house. They were not expecting women, so the institution, the structure of the institution was unwelcoming. But we still managed to do some work. I joined Parliament. I wanted to tell this story. And it was very interesting. For me, the first day entering there, it felt as if I had gone to a secondary school for boys. Because we were so few, and, you know, there was a lot of testosterone in the air, you know. And there were so many things that we experienced straight away. We were among the youngest women MPs who have come in, myself, Mbarire. There were 2 other young members of Parliament. And we suffered. We suffered from sexual harassment, you know. Members who could not call us honorable, they used to call us my daughter. You know, because they'd never seen, you know, these young people. When we go on maternity leave, they were like, what is that? Who goes on maternity leave in Parliament? You're supposed to come to Parliament after having children, not having them here, you know. And I still don't know whether Parliament has resolved the issue of maternity leave in Parliament, because what would happen is women MPs, you go and have your child and you come back, otherwise you lose your allowances. When you know that maternity leave is not supposed to be punitive. So I wonder if they have resolved it. I don't know how it is today. So there was a lot of what I call neck-down politics, and I'm sure those of you who are in the field, you see it as women. When we are talking about our issues, people are talking about our neck-down politics. How many children do you have? Who are you married to? How did you come? but we are always forever talking about neck down. And this is something we find to be a double standard. In campaigns, even where we work, that as women, we have to deal with that because nobody is listening to what we are saying from neck up. They are focusing on neck down. And I don't know why this is. It's part of culture, but it's also something we need to be talking to our young women about. I normally have a big program. I go to secondary schools and I talk to girls. I say, you have to understand that double standards to women will apply, but also we have to behave in a certain way. And I always say, it's very important to use brain power and not bottom power. Brain power gets you ahead, bottom power does not. I'm sure the women in this room understand, and also the men, you understand what I mean. So getting into parliament was interesting because we were such few women in parliament, but yet we had an agenda. And I want to challenge each one of you here, those of you who are women, who are going into leadership, that each one of you must leave a legacy. In whatever you're doing, whether you're in the corporate, whether you're in government, whether you're in politics. And your legacy must be, you must do something that has helped another woman. So when you are in a place like the county assembly or in the parliament, you must use that time to benefit other women. And men, by the way, don't worry, men. It's not as if we are not also working to benefit you. I'll give you an example. In 2004, we campaigned for the 0 rating of sanitary towels. It was difficult because if you think about it, the amount of money the government makes from taxing sanitary towels, where all women between 11 and 55 every month have to buy sanitary towels. That is a lot of income. But we had to go and explain, what was happening. That making sanitary towels expensive was creating a situation where girls were unable to sit for exams, girls were dropping out of schools. It was going to affect the economy 20 years down the line. When these girls have not gone to school, it has an effect on the economy in general. And we engaged the mandarins in Treasury, and we discovered that there was a committee in Treasury which determines how much tax to put on every single item. And when they came to the sanitary towels, they had put them in the same category with perfumes and lipsticks and other women's things. Because in that committee, there was not a single woman who could say, sanitary towels are not lipsticks. Sanitary towels are not luxury items. And it made me wonder last year. I saw the taxation coming back. And I started wondering about the mandarins in Treasury. And I started wondering whether there are any women who are sitting in that committee who can say that sanitary towels are not luxury items. But now I'm a judge, so I can't do those things. Now those questions are for you here to ask. But it was difficult. First of all, so once we persuaded Treasury says, okay, the minister said, okay, I'm bringing the proposal to Parliament. But you have to convince the members of Parliament. Well, it was difficult. First of all, in that time, and they were very conservative old wazes in Parliament, how can you bring the discussion of sanitary towels? And their grandfathers, and in their homes they don't discuss those things. So we had to work out a strategy as women. One of the strategies was to look for the members of Parliament who were polygamists and who had many daughters. Then we go and sit with them and calculate. You see, every month, like there was one who had 12 daughters and 3 wives. I went and told him, every month, the government is making this amount of money from you. He said, so you shop for them? I said, let us calculate. The sanitary towel is 250 shillings times, you have 15 women in your house, times every month, times 12 every year, then times 12 again for the years they'll be in your house. The guy was furious. He was like, the government is stealing from me. And therefore, when we went to campaign, you could see that both men and women gained. Oh. Your Excellency, welcome. Let us welcome the governor. Asante sana. So let the governor hear my story now. So he will talk to us after I've finished. So do you understand that both men and women benefited from the zero rating of sanitary towels? The men, their pockets were a bit lighter, and the women now could avail. So sometimes women's rights issues are also positive for men. And it's very important that we work together as partners with men. The kind of policies and laws that we changed in the 9th Parliament where we were, we did the zero rating of sanitary towels. We were able to introduce maternity leave, 3 months for women, 2 weeks for men. I'm sure most of you are young, you are enjoying. The law came in that parliament. We were able to introduce a condition to the political parties fund that says for a party to access the funds from the political parties fund, 1/3 of your National Executive Committee must be women. We were able to pass and get passed by Parliament the Sexual Offences Act. So all this we did when there was a majority of men in Parliament. There was not a majority of women in Parliament. It was a majority of men. Which shows you men can be sensitized on the issues of women if we engage them, if we educate them, and if it makes sense. Of course, for example, the campaign on the Sexual Offences Bill, there were many strategies that had to be employed. For example, I spoke to many MPs' wives. I spoke to many MPs' mothers. I spoke to many MPs' churches and the mothers' union in those churches. So what happened, some of the MPs who were very opposed to the Sexual Offences Bill, they could not say anything. Otherwise, when they go back home, they have to explain. But also we engaged MPs with doctors. Doctors came to explain. What happens when a child is sexually violated? What happens? What are the medical implications? We even talked about the cost implication of emergency, because rapes are normally considered in the emergency rooms, because when one is raped, you go to the emergency room. So what was the cost? Again, persuading my male colleagues on the issue of economics, why we need to have a law. What I find interesting, and perhaps, Governor, Your Excellency, you can help me, is I find as women, we have been able to organize ourselves around our issues. And then we organize and then we push our issues through. How do men organize? I've always wondered, how do men organize? Because I've just said we are equal but different, so men also have their issues. How do men organize around their issues? I see some organizations sometimes of men, but those ones I see them organizing around the issues of women, not around the issues of men. And yet men have very serious issues. Or is it like somebody told me the other day, you go, you kamata 1 and 2 watching football with your friends, then when you go home, you're locked out of the house and you sleep in the car and you can't say. Because men don't talk to each other. So I'm challenging the men in this room. Talk to one another organize. And nothing is the women's fault, because the men are not organizing. And when you're organized, you can ask us. Me, I'll come and give what I think. But it's very hard to help men because you're not organized. Men must organize. Anyway, let me get back to my topic. I wanted to say, what is the impact of women leadership? So it's going back to my original question, when I said, why do we need women in public office? And I want to say what I think the women leaders have done. One, area concern, constitutional change. What needed to be changed? There were colonial laws. There was accepted discrimination on women based on culture. There was lack of adequate representation. There was inadequate health care. There was child marriages. There was unequal division of looking after children. There was human trafficking. There were a lot of issues. There was land issues. Before the Constitution, by the way, a woman could not transfer her citizenship to her husband. But the husband can transfer to his wife. A woman could not transfer her citizenship to her children. So all these issues were resolved in the Constitution of Kenya. And I always carry a copy in my handbag. I call it the Women's Bible. It's also the People's Bible. But for me, there are very many rights. And each one of you in this room, I hope you own a constitution, since we passed it in 2010 in the referendum. It's a very important document, giving you your rights, your freedoms, telling you what the obligations of government are. It's a little book that you must always have. So the Constitution achieved equality, non-discrimination. It introduced the 1/3 in the county governments. In the national parliament, we have not achieved the 1/3, but we are no longer 18 women in parliament. There are more than 80 women in parliament. The Constitution has given women the ability to transfer citizenship to their husband and children. It has protected the land rights where women used to be disinherited and chased away. Women now have clear property rights protected under the Constitution. Women have human rights in the Bill of Rights, the right to dignity, the right to protection from violence. Equality in marriage is in the Constitution. Parental responsibility and child support is now the responsibility of both parents. Before the new Constitution, women were burdened. Not all, but some women were burdened with this. In Parliament, what have we achieved so far? Again, the impact of women in leadership. 0 rating on sanitary towels, although the tax is back. So that's something that needs to be checked. The Sexual Offences Act, the political party funding I spoke to earlier, maternity and paternity leave, the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, the FGM Act, and the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act. In institutions and policy change, we have been able, and we've seen, funds that allow women to get money. It's interesting also, I forgot to say, in the Constitution, we now have a provision that says where there is government procurement, 1/3 of those procurements should go to women-owned businesses. So that now also women can get a share of the government business. I want to just say, in the judiciary, we are also making some changes. We have courts that are specifically dealing with sexual and gender-based violence. We have one in Shanzu, we have 8 of them. We have been able, through jurisprudence and judgments, to settle some of the questions in matrimonial property, on the presumption of marriage, equal rights within marriage. Many more cases continue to come until they reach the Supreme Court. But I think that the presence of women in the judiciary, the gender sensitization of the male judicial officers has also brought in these results. I think it's important that as we celebrate the women who have gone before us, that we start to document so that we do not become like Mrs. Abuao, women who disappear because they are no longer, we don't know who they are, nobody wrote about them. I want to encourage us to write more about the women who have been before us. Each one of you comes from a village where there is a woman who did something exceptional. But we don't talk about them. And then it disappears. That history disappears. Let's protect that history, even as we're looking to the future. The second thing is that we need to be careful that where we have reached, we do not roll back. Like I've said, I pointed out about the sanitary towels, but I can also point out, you know, I am a Kenyan and I observe the 1/3 policy is not being necessarily fulfilled in all appointments. So again, we need voices to remind our leaders that they need to keep to the 1/3 principle. But as I wrap up now, because I didn't want to say too much, and as we look and see the impact that women leadership has made in public office, I think it's important for each one of you to determine how you will join women in leadership. It could be elective, it could be appointive. It could be to support other women. It could be to just have a gathering like this in which to share. I know when I look back, I think I may have left a legacy. Of course, legacy is not for me to say. It is for others. But I know that when I was young, I was raised in a home where there was domestic violence. And one of the reasons my career has gone the way it did on women's rights, human rights, is because I used to pray. You know, my mom and myself and my siblings, we used to be thrown out of the house. Sometimes my father, then he would take a bit to drink. When he comes, it would be a bit chaotic. My mom used to keep cows, so we would go and sleep there until morning. And I remember thinking, you know, when you're sleeping outside, and although I came from a very privileged background, my parents lived in Karen, in Nairobi, but then I just thought, we are just like another woman in Kibera or in Mathare who has been chased out of their home and is sleeping outside. So these things, they know no class, but they affect all women. And I remember thinking to myself, saying, what can I do to make women safe? How can women be safer? And if you track my history and my work, I have really worked to do my part in trying to see how can I contribute to keeping women safe. But still, women are not safe, still. Which woman here can walk in the street at night without fear? So we are still a long way to go. But at least today, if I was to leave this world, I think I can say I've done my part. And that is my challenge to each one of you who are here today. What will you leave? How will you help? How will you help another woman? I think I want to stop here. By the way, I know what the Honorable MCA was saying, because if you let me speak, I can speak for hours. I can now move from here, I can go into the Sexual Offences Act. I can tell you what it is there. I can now move, we can have another discussion. But I want to thank you very much. I hope that I've been able to share something for you to take home with you, and something that tells you that women must be in leadership, that women must partner with men in leadership, that women must sit on the table that is making decisions about them. I thank you.